If you've been scrolling through countless listings, comparing numbers on spec sheets, and still feel like you're just guessing which machine will actually get the job done, this review is here to clear that up. I've spent a few evenings watching YouTubers, reading forum threads, and talking to a couple of small shop owners who are actually using this kind of gear day in and day out. Link is in the description if you want to check the product details on Amazon. The question isn't just does it cut, or does it weld? It's whether it can replace 3 separate machines without making you compromise on the things that matter most in a real workshop. First off, let's talk about what the Okanen 3-in-1 claims to be: a plasma cutter, a TIG welder, and a stick MMA welder, all wrapped in one metal box. That sounds like a space-saving dream, especially if you're working out of a garage or a tight commercial bay. The biggest appeal is the idea that you buy one unit and you get 3 different processes, each of which usually requires its own power supply, cables, and sometimes even a separate ground system. In practice, that means you'll have one set of controls, one set of safety interlocks, and one maintenance schedule to remember, which can be a real time saver. Who should consider this machine? If you're a hobbyist who jumps between sheet metal fabrications, occasional bicycle frame repairs, and maybe an occasional automotive restoration, the Okanen could be a solid middle ground. The TIG function, for instance, is praised for being easier to use than any other TIG welder. That's not a vague claim, it reflects the fact that many users who are new to TIG often struggle with pulse settings and arc starts. The built-in interface on this unit simplifies those knobs, letting you dial in a decent weld without needing a separate TIG controller. For a DIYer who only occasionally needs a clean, precise weld on thin aluminum or stainless steel, that can make the difference between a successful project and a frustrated weekend. On the professional side, the machine's arc MMA capability is described as a necessity in any industrial shop or home workshop. That's because stick welding is still the go-to process for thicker steel, repair work, and field jobs where portability matters. Having a 200A output puts you in the range needed for welding inch plate and beyond, which is more than enough for most shop-level tasks. If you already own a dedicated stick welder, you might not need this function, but if you're looking to consolidate tools and free up bench space, the trade-off can be worth it. Now, let's get into the practical strengths that actually matter once the unit is plugged in. The plasma cutting side delivers 200A, which translates into cutting thicknesses up to about 12 mm of mild steel when you're running it at full capacity. In a real-world scenario, say you're cutting panels for a metal art piece or prepping brackets for a custom build, that level of power means you can get through the material in one pass, without having to slow down or risk a jagged edge. Users have noted that the cutter looks and feels like the separate machines, which is a subtle way of saying the torch ergonomics and control response match what you'd expect from a dedicated plasma cutter. That consistency reduces the learning curve if you've already handled a standalone torch. The TIG side, as mentioned, is where the unit seems to shine for beginners. The machine supplies a stable AC/DC output, and the internal cooling system keeps the torch from overheating during longer runs. One practical scenario: welding thin aluminum tubing for a bike frame. The heat input is gentle enough that the material doesn't warp, and the filler material beads look clean and consistent. That outcome is something you often see only with higher-end TIG rigs that have sophisticated pulse controls, so the fact that Okanen can approximate that performance in a single-box design is noteworthy. The stick welder, while robust in terms of amperage, does have one hidden trade-off. Because the 3 functions share a common power supply, you'll notice a slight dip in current if you try to push all 3 at once, though in normal use you're only running one mode at a time, so it isn't usually an issue. However, if you're in a situation where you need to switch quickly between plasma and stick, like cutting a piece, then immediately welding it without moving the workpiece, you'll have to reset the machine between modes, which adds a few seconds of downtime. In a high-volume production line, that could be a bottleneck, but for most hobbyists and small shop jobs, that extra pause is negligible. What about the downsides? First, the size. While it's marketed as a space-saving solution, the unit is still fairly bulky compared to a dedicated plasma cutter. If you have a tiny bench, you'll need to allocate a decent amount of floor space just for the chassis and the integrated cooling pump. Second, the weight. The combined power electronics and transformer make it heavier than a typical handheld plasma cutter, so you'll need a sturdy,